Normandy is the most visited region in northern France. You've probably heard of it. Something about a war, something about cheese. It receives tens of millions of tourist visits per year when domestic and international travel are counted together. But it's also a very unusual travel destination. First, there is the war tourism. This is by far the largest draw. The D-Day beaches, cemeteries, memorials and museums attract millions of travellers, but more on that later. A second major category is heritage tourism. Medieval urban centres such as Rouen, Caen and smaller towns generate steady visitor flows. Mont-Saint-Michel alone receives over 2.5 million visitors per year, most on day trips. Normandy is positioned along the English Channel, directly opposite southern England. The region extends from the Seine estuary in the east to the Cotentin Peninsula in the west. The Seine is the largest and most influential river, running from Paris through Rouen to Le Havre. It is wide, navigable, and historically central to trade and industry. 3.5 million people live in Normandy. The French have a reputation for being difficult with tourists. Normans can be difficult with everyone, including other French people. You should attempt a few words in French before defaulting to English. Bonjour goes a long way, so does buying something. The rest of France considers them reserved, cautious, and somewhat inscrutable. There's a regional phrase, "T'es ben couille, t'es ben que non," which means maybe yes, maybe no. This is essentially the Norman national motto. Commitment to definite positions is not the local style. To understand how Normandy got its name, we need to rewind the timeline a bit. Around the 9th and 10th centuries, various Scandinavian gentlemen with creative facial hair and an enthusiasm for maritime warfare began showing up along the French coast. These were Vikings, obviously, and while their reputation for pillaging was entirely warranted, they also demonstrated a remarkable capacity for settling down once they found a bit of land they liked. In the year 911, the French king, Charles III, known as Charles the Simple, which was less about his intelligence and more about his uncomplicated approach to kingship, essentially gave up and granted the territory to a Viking leader named Rollo. The deal was easy. Rollo gets the land, Rollo converts to Christianity, Rollo stops bothering everyone else. He took the deal. And so Normandy was born, named after Northmen or Norsemen. Today, it's pretty easy to reach Normandy. The region lies within 2 to 3 hours of Paris by road or rail. Ferry links connect the region directly to southern England. Ports and rail corridors have many visitor entry points. Getting around Normandy is easiest by car. The motorway network prioritizes east-west movement between Paris and the coast. The A13 is the primary artery. It links Paris to Rouen and the western edge of the region. Air transport plays a minor role. Normandy has several regional airports, but the routes are limited. The world-famous Mont-Saint-Michel is a tidal island commune in western Normandy, in the department of Manche. It sits at the edge of the Bay of Mont-Saint-Michel, right near the border with Brittany. It's positioned 1 kilometre off the mainland, depending on the tide, the moon, and whatever astronomical factors people explain while being wrong. It has been a place of strategic, religious, architectural, and logistical interest since at least the early medieval period. Mont-Saint-Michel began as a religious site in the 8th century. According to legend, Archangel Michael visited Aubert, the local bishop, who required repeated prompting. Michael demanded a church be built on the rocky outcrop, but Aubert ignored him twice. Michael, not to be deterred, burned a hole in Aubert's skull with his finger. Over time, a monastery developed. Romanesque elements gave way to Gothic additions. Strong defensive walls were built. The mount became a pilgrimage site, then a fortress, then a prison during the French Revolution, then a monument. The abbey that exists today is mostly Romanesque and Gothic. The nave dates from the 11th and 12th centuries. The choir was rebuilt in the 15th century after the original collapsed. The Bay of Mont-Saint-Michel experiences some of the largest tidal variations in Europe. The difference between low and high tide can reach 15 meters. When the tide comes in, it moves rapidly, at the speed of a galloping horse, according to the frequently cited Victor Hugo quotation. Is this accurate? Not really. Water does not gallop, but the tide does move quickly, up to 6 kilometers per hour in places. The quicksand-like sections of the bay can really be dangerous. People have died here, not many, but some. The bay is monitored now, and rescue services are there, but the point stands: do not wander off across the sand without a guide. The causeway, added in the 19th century, altered sediment flow and encouraged silting. Engineers later attempted to correct this with hydraulic projects. The current bridge allows water to circulate more freely. This is all very sensible. The mount itself was entirely cut off by water before the causeway was built. Now, thanks to the new bridge and better water management, the island gets properly surrounded during high tides with large coefficients, which occurs about 80 times per year. If you want to see this, check the tide tables in advance. They're available online. For true isolation, you should arrive early morning or stay overnight. The Mount has a handful of hotels. They are expensive and cramped, and the walls are thin. After the day trippers leave, the island becomes quiet, almost eerily so. Streets that were packed hours before are now empty. It's genuinely strange. But is it worth it? Probably. Depends how much you value silence and how little you value your credit card's well-being. Mont-Saint-Michel and its bay received UNESCO World Heritage Site status in 1979. The UNESCO designation covers not just the mount itself, but the entire bay, some 500 square kilometres of tidal flats and salt marshes. If you've bothered to travel to Mont-Saint-Michel, and you have presumably since you're watching this, the cleanest route is Paris to Rennes by high-speed train. From Rennes you transfer to a regional bus that runs directly to Mont-Saint-Michel. The bus drops you at the visitor complex, not at the mount itself. From here, travel becomes pedestrian. You either take a free shuttle or walk the final stretch across the bridge. What happened to Le Havre? This is the question that springs unbidden to the mind of any visitor who has even a passing familiarity with traditional Norman architecture. The Second World War, you see, treated Le Havre with particular unkindness. Between 1940 and 1944, Allied bombing raids destroyed 80% of the city centre. The historic core was effectively erased. What rose from this rubble was something altogether different. Auguste Perret was an architect, concrete lover, and the man who would spend the remainder of his career building what is essentially a masterclass in modernist urban planning across 150 hectares of former destruction. The result? A UNESCO World Heritage Site, designated in 2005, representing an outstanding post-war example of urban planning and architecture. The list includes the Pyramids of Giza, the Great Wall of China, the Taj Mahal, and, of course, the concrete apartment blocks of Le Havre. One wonders if the UNESCO committee members visited in February, when the concrete achieves its fullest expression of grey. Speaking of concrete, the Church of St. Joseph was completed in 1957, 3 years after Perret's death. The tower rises 107 metres above the city centre and commemorates the 5,000 civilians who died during wartime. It's a concrete octagonal spire that has no bells, but it has 12,000 pieces of coloured glass set into the concrete lattice. Le Havre is not only a concrete exhibition, but also France's second largest port after Marseille. The port handles 70 million tonnes of cargo annually. The port area stretches for kilometres along the Seine estuary. The river mouth here creates a natural harbour. There are container ships and cargo vessels of bewildering variety. The port also explains rather a lot about Le Havre's general atmosphere, the presence of seafood restaurants, the slight industrial tinge to the air, and the pragmatic working nature of the city. This is not a resort town. Le Havre has a beach. It extends for 2 kilometres along the seafront, framed by beach huts and a promenade suitable for the usual promenade activities. The beach here is made of ankle-turning pebbles. The English Channel coastline is what it is. The beach huts are rather nice though, brightly coloured and striped. The promenade, and here we return to Perret because one always returns to Perret in Le Havre, has a tunnel running beneath it that connects the city centre to the seafront. This tunnel, decorated with tiles, is actually quite pleasant in that utilitarian French way. It prevents one from having to cross traffic. The Hanging Gardens of Le Havre opened to the public in 2008 as part of a broader urban redevelopment strategy. The location is a former military fort, Fort Sainte-Adresse, positioned on high ground above the city and the port. Le Havre is windy and grey. Still, the summers can be pleasant. When the sun appears, the coast has genuine appeal. Will you love it? Possibly not, but you'll find it compelling in that slightly uncomfortable way. This city is a guilty pleasure. Before we continue this journey, please push the like button to support our channel. Honfleur is Normandy's prettiest small harbour town. It sits just opposite Le Havre across the Seine estuary, and it couldn't be more different. The name itself, and here's where we enter the murky waters of etymology, possibly derives from Honfleur, combining a Norse personal name with the word for inlet, or possibly not. The 100 Years' War saw the English occupy the town many times. It was, as the name suggests, a lengthy affair with considerable back and forth. The English were expelled definitively in 1450, and the French have been running things since. By the medieval period, Honfleur had established itself as a port. Ships departed from here, bound for Canada, Brazil, and various other destinations. Samuel de Champlain set sail from Honfleur in 1608, eventually founding Quebec. The old harbour is the centrepiece of Honfleur. It has this famous rectangular basin, ringed by tall, narrow houses with slate facades. These buildings date mostly from the 16th through 18th centuries. The houses are tall because of medieval property taxation, which was calculated based on ground floor frontage. Builders responded by constructing upward rather than outward. Some buildings reach 6 or 7 stories. The upper floors overhang slightly. All of this creates a pleasing visual effect. Église Sainte-Catherine is built almost entirely of timber. This is apparently the largest wooden church in France. The church dates from the late 15th century, following the English departure, when the townspeople needed a place of worship and the stonemasons were busy elsewhere. Local shipwrights stepped in and applied their expertise. The result is a building that resembles, not coincidentally, an inverted ship's hull. Art galleries are common. Honfleur is often cited as the birthplace of Impressionism, which is not entirely without foundation. Eugène Boudin was born here in 1824, and while Boudin isn't exactly a household name, he was influential. Boudin encouraged the young Claude Monet to paint outdoors, which was revolutionary at the time. Before that, everyone painted indoors, looking at bowls of fruit. Honfleur is comfortingly small. You can really cross the centre without breaking a sweat. It is also crowded, expensive relative to less touristy Norman towns, and somewhat aware of its own appeal in a way that affects pricing and atmosphere. Visit in the shoulder season if you can, and walk beyond the immediate waterfront area if you want to see something beyond the obvious. The town lacks a train station. The nearest stations are Le Havre and Deauville-Trouville, from which buses run to Honfleur. If you're driving, parking in central Honfleur ranges from difficult to impossible. There are car parks on the outskirts, and you should use them. The Pont de Normandy, a cable-stayed bridge that crosses the Seine estuary, is nearby and impressive if you have any interest in civil engineering. It held the record for the world's longest cable-stayed bridge upon completion in 1995. It no longer holds that record, but it's still quite large, and there's a toll. Rouen is very old. It has been inhabited since at least the Gallo-Roman period. Under Roman administration, the city grew in the usual Roman fashion, with roads, baths, and temples. The city's medieval period is where things get properly interesting, or properly violent. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Rouen passed through Frankish hands, became a bishopric of considerable importance, and then was handed to the Vikings. The Norman period gave Rouen its cathedral, its abbeys, and its general architectural character. And then there's Joan of Arc. In 1431, she was tried for heresy in Rouen by a court operating under English influence, found guilty, and burned at the stake in the city's old market square. She was 19 years old. The whole affair was a grotesque miscarriage of justice, and the English and Burgundian authorities involved knew it perfectly well. 25 years later, a posthumous retrial declared her innocent. Bit late, that. She was canonized in 1920 and became a saint, a martyr, and Rouen's most famous historical association. During the Renaissance, Rouen became one of France's wealthiest cities, thanks in large part to its position on the Seine, which made it a major inland port. The 19th century brought industrialization, railways, and a general covering of everything in soot. Gustave Flaubert was born in Rouen in 1821, and the city features prominently, if not always flatteringly, in his work. Madame Bovary, his most celebrated novel, is set in and around Rouen. The city was occupied by German forces in 1940 and heavily bombed by Allied forces in 1944, especially during the weeks surrounding D-Day. Large parts of the historic centre were destroyed, including areas along the waterfront and the southern approaches to the cathedral. The reconstruction effort, which continued well into the 1960s, replaced much of what had been lost with the sort of functional concrete architecture that was fashionable at the time. Cathédrale Notre-Dame de Rouen is the big attraction. It's the one Monet painted 30 times. Construction began in the 12th century on the site of earlier churches and continued in various phases until the 16th century. The building is a true catalogue of Gothic architectural styles, from early Gothic through flamboyant Gothic. The west facade is extraordinary. It's a dense wall of sculpture, arches and ornamental detail that Monet found so endlessly fascinating. Inside, the cathedral contains the tomb of Richard the Lionheart. Well, his heart at any rate. Richard, who was King of England and Duke of Normandy, requested that his heart be buried in Rouen upon his death in 1199. Whether visiting a 12th century cardiac relic should be a holiday highlight is a question only you can answer. From the cathedral, walk west along the Rue de Gros Horloge, the city's most famous street and one of its oldest, and you will arrive at the Gros Horloge itself, which is a large astronomical clock mounted on a Renaissance arch spanning the street. The clock dates from the 14th century and is one of the oldest working clock mechanisms in France. Today, 115,000 people live in Rouen. The population has been relatively stable in recent decades, which is unusual for a French city of this size. Many comparable cities have experienced either rapid growth or slow decline, and Rouen has done neither. The city has a large student population owing to the University of Rouen, Normandy. The Seine at Rouen is wide. The city is often described as the last bridge point on the Seine before the estuary, which is historically true. This meant that for centuries all overland traffic crossing the lower Seine had to pass through or near Rouen. The transport system centres on the Rouen Metro, which, and I have to disappoint you here, is not really a metro. It's a light rail system, 2 lines running partly underground through the city centre and then emerging into the open air in the suburbs. The Etretat Cliffs on the Alabaster Coast are neither the tallest in Europe nor the most geologically complex, yet they have captured the attention of writers and painters. The entire coast is made of chalk formations, but Etretat possesses the most eroded examples, 3 natural arches and an isolated sea stack that have become the defining images of Norman coastal geology. Port d'Aval is the most photographed of Etretat's arches. You can find it on the southwestern end of the beach. The arch stands at a height of around 70 metres. Guy de Maupassant, the French writer who either loved or hated everything, depending on which biography you read, famously compared the Port d'Aval to an elephant dipping its trunk into the sea. Beyond the Port d'Aval, accessible only at low tide, La Manoport is the largest of the 3 arches. The opening spans over 70 metres in width and rises to comparable heights. It's large enough that boats have historically passed through. The northeastern arch, Port d'Amont, is smaller and geometrically simpler than its counterpart. The opening is lower and wider. Above the arch, the cliff rises to a plateau where the Chapelle Notre-Dame de la Garde stands. It's a small chapel from the 19th century, rebuilt in 1950 after wartime damage. The transformation to tourist destination began in the early 19th century. Alphonse Karr, a Parisian writer and editor, moved to Etretat in 1833 and began publicising its virtues. He essentially invented the town's reputation through access to publishing platforms. Today, more than 1.5 million travellers visit the cliffs each year. There is one critical safety note. The cliffs sometimes shed material. Chalk falls can happen without warning. Standing directly beneath cliff overhangs can put you at risk. The beach at Etretat stretches in a gentle arc between the 2 main headlands, a distance of several hundred metres. At high tide, the beach narrows dramatically. It sometimes leaves only a narrow strip a few metres wide. You can swim here, but the water is cold. Channel temperatures go from 8 degrees Celsius in winter to 18 degrees in the warmest summer weeks. The town itself is modest. Maybe 1,500 people live here. The main street, Rue Adolphe Boisset, runs straight down toward the beach. It has all the shops and services visitors will need. The architecture is largely 19th and early 20th century, with Anglo-Norman influences everywhere. There are half-timbered facades and an unmistakable air of seaside prosperity. You can't truly experience Etretat without like walking the cliff paths, hiking around here is very popular indeed. Etretat sits in a notch. On either side are cliffs. You go upwards immediately, with no gentle warm-up. A short loop from the town up one side and down the other takes a few hours with stops. Longer walks along the GR21 can extend for many kilometres in either direction. The crowds during peak season can test your patience. July and August is peak season with maximum density. The beach disappears beneath towels and bodies. The clifftop paths develop queues at viewpoints and the car parks fill by mid-morning. Daily visitor numbers during peak summer weekends can exceed 20,000 people. Caen is the capital of the Calvados department, a designation that sounds far more glamorous than it probably should. The city lies about 15 kilometres inland from the English Channel coast, which means it's close enough to smell the sea on a good day. Caen's history is one of those sprawling, messy affairs. William the Conqueror made Caen one of his favourite cities. Born in Falaise, 35 kilometres to the south, William chose Caen as a key seat of ducal power. He and his wife Matilda of Flanders founded two enormous abbeys, the Abbey aux Hommes, men's abbey for him, and the Abbey aux Dames, women's abbey for her. These were built, at least in part, as penance for their marriage, which the Pope had initially forbidden on grounds of consanguinity. They were distant cousins, which in the 11th century was apparently a bigger scandal than invading a neighbouring country. William also built the Château de Caen, a massive fortress above the city that became one of the largest medieval enclosures in Europe. He was buried at the Abbey aux Hommes in 1087, in a ceremony that went rather badly, involving a fire, a disrupted funeral, and a body that didn't quite fit the sarcophagus. History is sometimes more grotesque than fiction. The Battle of Caen was one of the most destructive urban engagements of the Second World War. Following the D-Day landings on June 6, 1944, British and Canadian forces spent over 2 months trying to capture Caen from the Germans. The original plan had called for the city to be taken on D-Day itself. It wasn't taken until late July, and by the time it was, the better part of the medieval city centre had been ruined. The Château de Caen is one of the largest fortresses in Europe. The outer walls cover an area of 5.5 hectares. The ramparts are walkable and offer decent views over the city. Within the walls you'll find 2 museums. The ruins of the ducal palace are visible, as are the remains of the 12th century chapel of Saint-Georges. William's Abbey is the current home of Caen's City Hall. The church attached to the abbey, the Église Saint-Étienne, is a masterwork of Norman Romanesque architecture, with later Gothic additions. Matilda's Abbey is the feminine counterpart to William's, and arguably the more elegant of the two. The Église de la Trinité is a stunning Romanesque building. It's slightly smaller and more refined than Saint-Étienne, with wonderful carved capitals and a crypt that dates to the original 11th century construction. Why do people visit Caen? This is a question worth asking, because the city isn't an obvious tourist magnet. Nobody is planning a great weekend in Caen. Nobody is going to Caen for the nightlife, and yet the city attracts huge numbers of travellers each year. The biggest draw is the World War II heritage. The Mémorial de Caen, opened in 1988, is one of the finest war museums in Europe. If you have any interest in the 20th century's most devastating conflict, this museum is a serious piece of work. The city is also a natural base for visiting the D-Day beaches, which lie along the coast to the north and west. There's also the ferry connection. Brittany Ferries runs regular services between Portsmouth and Ouistreham, meaning that Caen is, for many British travellers, quite literally the first French city they encounter. The Cotentin Peninsula stretches northward from the Normandy coast into the English Channel. It's not a large peninsula. It measures 70 kilometres from its base to its northern tip and is perhaps 40 kilometres wide at its broadest. The landscape is, depending on your aesthetic disposition, either ruggedly beautiful or a series of damp fields, punctuated by granite. And granite is very much the word here. The northern part of the peninsula is underlain by some of the oldest rock in France. The stone is hard, grey pink and everywhere. The Cotentin has large wetlands, especially in the interior, where the rivers Douve and Divette create a low-lying, flood-prone landscape that is very, very muddy. The obvious question is, who would voluntarily live here? Well, Cotentin is less densely populated, with the notable exception of Cherbourg, which is home to about 80,000 people. Cherbourg is the main city, the economic hub, the ferry port, and the place where, statistically, you are most likely to find a decent cup of coffee on the peninsula. The town's harbour is one of the largest artificial harbours in the world. It's enclosed by a breakwater that is over 6 kilometres long. Napoleon ordered its construction back in the day. The project took the better part of a century to complete. The peninsula is, by Normandy standards, relatively uncrowded. In July and August, the population swells with French holidaymakers. The Cotentin is very much a French destination, not an international one. British visitors come through Cherbourg on the ferries, but most of them are en route to somewhere else. The western coast of the Cotentin faces the Channel Islands and catches the full brunt of the Atlantic weather. There are wind-blasted dunes and some broad beaches. The dunes of Biville and Vauville form one of the largest dune systems in Europe. The landscape is stark and sandy. Cap de la Hague is the northwestern tip of the Cotentin and one of the most interesting stretches of coastline in northern France. It is, strictly speaking, not a single cape, but a region. The landscape here is raw granite and sheer cliffs dropping into waters. The Nez de Jobour is the highest cliff on the Hague coast. It's about 130 metres high. There are walking paths along the cliff top, and on a clear day you can see Guernsey and Alderney. At the very tip of Cap de la Hague, just off the tiny village of Goury, sits the Phare de la Hague. This is a squat, sturdy lighthouse built in 1837 on a rock called Le Gros de Rat, positioned in the middle of the tidal race. You can reach it on foot at low tide along a slippery causeway. There are, in the grand catalogue of holiday destinations, places you visit for the sun, places you visit for the food, and places like Normandy that you visit because you once watched a Spielberg film and spent 3 hours weeping into a sofa cushion. D-Day, formerly known as Operation Overlord, was the Allied invasion of German-occupied France on June 6, 1944. It was and remains the largest seaborne invasion in the history of warfare. 156,000 troops from the United States, the United Kingdom and Canada crossed the English Channel and stormed 5 beaches along an 80-kilometre stretch of the Normandy coast. The operation had been in planning for over a year and was the most complicated logistical undertaking in human history. The challenge was not merely military, but meteorological. The invasion required specific tidal conditions, specific moonlight, and specific wind patterns, which meant there was a narrow window of opportunity in early June. On the morning of June 6th, the assault began. 5 beaches had been assigned code names: Utah and Omaha as American sectors, Gold and Sword as British sectors, and Juno as the Canadian sector. The fighting was brutal. At Omaha Beach in particular, German defences were far stronger than Allied intelligence had predicted, and casualties were catastrophic. By the end of the day, 2,000 American soldiers had died at Omaha Beach alone. Estimates vary, but total Allied casualties on D-Day were somewhere between 10 and 12,000. The Battle of Normandy that followed would continue for nearly 3 months until the liberation of Paris on August 25, 1944. It would take another 11 months to end the war in Europe, but D-Day had changed the course of the conflict. D-Day tourism did not spring into being fully formed the moment the war ended. The earliest visitors were veterans. They came back in the late 1940s and 1950s, often quietly and without fanfare. The Normandy American Cemetery and Memorial at Colleville-sur-Mer was established in 1956. The release of Saving Private Ryan in 1998 and the HBO series Band of Brothers in 2001 did what no amount of commemorative ceremony could. They made D-Day cinematic. Visitor numbers increased almost overnight. The museums expanded and new ones opened. The Utah Beach Landing Museum, located almost directly on the sand, is one of the best in the region. The Omaha Beach Memorial Museum has a large collection of uniforms, vehicles, and weapons. All 5 beaches are accessible and all are signposted clearly. Roads are good, though narrow in places. One day is enough to visit 1 or 2 beaches or museums and a cemetery, but it's not sufficient to do the subject justice, and you will leave with the nagging sense that you missed things because you did. 3 to 4 days allows for more depth. You can visit the major sites without rushing, add the Caen Memorial, and explore some of the lesser-known locations like Longues-sur-Mer or the Hillman Fortress. You'll spend some time simply being in the landscape, walking the beaches and sitting in the cemeteries. Numerous guided tours are available. The best guides are often former military personnel or professional historians. They can bring the landscape to life with a combination of factual detail and narrative skill that changes a drive through the countryside into a sustained act of revelation. A bad guide will herd you through 5 sites in 6 hours and leave you with nothing but sore feet and a sense of historical confusion. Prices usually range from 80 to 150 euros per person for a full-day tour, with private tours costing more. Did you find this video inspiring? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. If you loved this journey, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more hidden corners of France.